Welcome back. I'm Walter Reed, and by the end of this lesson, we'll have a 2D platformer where the character can not only jump, but has the power to double jump and even quadruple jump. So let's get to it. We're starting off in our Unity project. This should look familiar from our last lesson. We've already set up a number of platforms that the player can walk on, or double jump off of. Our platforms already contain Sprite Renderer and Box Collider 2D. We need to add a ground layer. We select all the level objects and set the ground layer. While our player object already has a Box Collider 2D, it doesn't have any physics materials. Let's add that now. We want to make sure that the friction and the bounciness is set to 0. Let's also make sure that when colliding with the platforms, the player object doesn't rotate in any unforeseen ways. To do that, we add a constraint to the z-axis. Finally, we add the player script to the player object. If you followed the earlier lesson, you should have the script already created, but don't worry, I'll be going over all the changes we need in just a moment. Okay, everything looks great. Let's get to the script. We're going to need a variety of public and private variables. The first two relate to the left and right movements of the player object, and of course how fast it moves. The next two, the rigid body and the box collider, are references to the player object. We will also need 3 variables related to jumping. Those are jump power, relating to how high we want the player object to jump, the jump count, which relates to the current jump we are on, and the jump count max, which will allow our player to jump multiple times in a single jump. Finally, we also have a serialized field for the layer mask, which will be used to determine if the player is on the ground or not. In our start method, we're going to get 2 components. One, the rigid body, and the other, the box collider 2D. Good practice dictates that you should have, at the start of your class, required component, and we would set that to rigid body and box collider. We will also set the jump count max to 2. In our update method, we set horizontal to input.getAccessRaw. This will be used to get a value between 1 and -1 to better represent input on a 2D game. The first thing we want to do is check to make sure that the player object is grounded. If it is, we set the jump count to 1. Next, we're going to check to see if the input key, in this case the space key, has been pressed. If it has, we do another check to is grounded. We now know that the character is on the ground and that the space key has been pressed. So we change the rigid body velocity to a vector up and multiply that by jump power. We're going to have an else statement as well. This will allow us to check whether or not the space bar was pressed again in flight, and allow us to take advantage of a double, a triple, or a quadruple jump. We check to see if the jump count is less than the jump count max. If it is, then we set the rigid body velocity equal to the vector 2 up multiplied by the jump power. We then increment the jump count. In the fixed update, we want to update the rigid body velocity to account for the horizontal inputs. So we create a new vector 2 and multiply the horizontal times the speed and update the velocity in the y direction. To determine if the player object is grounded, we use a raycast hit 2D object. That takes in an origin, a size, an angle, a direction, a distance, and a layer mask. In our example, we're going to set the angle to 0, we're going to set the vector to down, and we want to set the distance to 0.1. We then return the raycast value if it does not equal null. We had some errors in our script, so let's fix them now. Let's set the int to jump count max, and let's fix the is grounded where we had an extra parenthesis. With the errors now fixed, everything is working correctly. I hope you found this useful. If you did, please consider telling me in the comments, and like or subscribe to see more videos like this in the future.